There is something significant unfolding beneath all this silence right now. And if you have been feeling a strange shift lately, if your intuition keeps telling you that something deeper is happening behind the distance, understand this clearly. It is not simply your imagination. Something very real is forming quietly inside them. A final decision is beginning to take shape within the hidden spaces of their heart. And whether they openly admit it or not, every part of that decision carries your presence within it. Your energy, your memory, your impact on their life has become impossible for them to fully ignore anymore. From the outside, they may still appear calm. They may continue acting distant, detached, or emotionally controlled. At times, they may even seem cold or unaffected. But beneath that surface, something much heavier is happening internally. A truth they spent a long time avoiding is now becoming too powerful to suppress any longer.
What they feel can no longer stay buried without consequence, and that changes everything. What they are wrestling with right now is not a casual emotional moment. It is not temporary confusion or passing nostalgia. This is becoming a defining turning point in their life, one capable of changing the direction they move in from this point forward. They are standing at the edge of a truth that could reshape who they become emotionally. And regardless of what choice they eventually make, whether they move closer to you or continue resisting the connection, they will not leave this inner struggle unchanged. Something inside them is already transforming. You need to understand something important. The tension you have been sensing has meaning behind it. The silence between you has meaning behind it. Even the distance itself carries purpose, because behind the scenes, an emotional battle has been intensifying quietly within them, and it is now reaching a peak. The feelings you keep sensing are not fantasies created by longing. They are not imaginary signs your heart invented out of hope. They are reflections of someone deeply conflicted because your presence touched something profound inside them. They are standing at an emotional crossroads now, where every direction they turn eventually leads their thoughts back toward you. For a long time, they tried distracting themselves from this connection. They buried themselves in routines, responsibilities, work, pride, emotional distance, anything capable of dulling what they felt. They convinced themselves that enough time apart would eventually weaken the intensity of this bond. But some connections do not disappear simply because distance exists. And the harder they tried pushing this one away, the more strongly it returned. Because what happened between you was never shallow. It reached beyond attraction, beyond temporary emotion. It touched deeper layers of identity, vulnerability, and emotional truth that cannot simply be erased when life becomes uncomfortable. And now something unexpected is happening inside them. They are beginning to revisit everything, not only the memories themselves, but the meaning behind them. They are reflecting on what this connection revealed about their life, their fears, their emotional patterns, and the person they have become over time. For the first time, they are not just analyzing you. They are analyzing themselves honestly. And this is exactly where the energy begins shifting. Because the moment a person starts questioning the story they once used to protect themselves, transformation is already much closer than it appears externally. This decision goes far deeper than whether they should stay or leave. It reaches into a much more confronting question. Are they finally ready to face themselves without emotional masks, distractions, or defenses protecting them anymore? That is the real struggle happening beneath the surface. Part of them feels powerfully drawn toward you in a way they cannot logically explain. No matter how much they attempt to resist it, something inside them keeps pulling them back emotionally, and that pull frightens them because it asks for honesty. It asks them to stop hiding behind emotional distance. It asks them to become vulnerable enough to admit what this connection truly means to them. For a long time, they believed they could control these feelings by avoiding them. But emotions that are deeply rooted do not disappear through suppression. They wait. They grow quieter for a while. Then, eventually, they rise again, often stronger than before. That is what is happening now. The emotional pressure they have been carrying internally is becoming impossible to ignore. And because of that, they are beginning to see the connection differently than they once did. At first, they focused mainly on fear. Fear of vulnerability. Fear of rejection. Fear of losing control. Fear of repeating old pain. But now another fear is appearing beside those older fears. The fear of losing you permanently, and strangely, that fear feels even heavier, because deep down they are starting to understand that meaningful connections do not appear endlessly throughout life. Some people enter our world and change us permanently. Some people awaken parts of us we cannot put back to sleep afterward. You became one of those people for them. That is why this inner conflict feels so intense. This is not simply about romance anymore. It is about identity, about emotional truth, about whether they continue living from fear or finally allow themselves to move toward something real. Right now, their heart and mind are pulling in opposite directions. One side wants safety, control, certainty, emotional distance. The other side wants you. And somewhere between those two forces, a final decision is quietly forming. You may not see it fully yet on the outside, but internally the process has already begun. Because eventually every person reaches a moment where avoiding the truth becomes more painful than facing it. And they are getting very close to that moment now. Your absence does not feel small or insignificant to them. It does not blend quietly into the background of their life the way ordinary distance does. Instead, it leaves behind a constant sense that something important is missing, something unfinished, something unresolved that keeps pulling their attention back toward you no matter how hard they try to focus elsewhere or continue moving forward. And that feeling has become impossible for them to completely silence. Part of them feels deeply drawn toward you with an intensity they cannot fully explain. Yet another part resists with equal force because truly facing those emotions would require something they have avoided for a long time: vulnerability. Real vulnerability. Not the appearance of openness, not carefully controlled emotions, but genuine emotional honesty. It would require them to stop hiding behind distance and emotional protection. It would ask them to stop pretending strength means never needing anyone. It would push them to live with real courage instead of simply performing control. And that kind of transformation feels terrifying to someone who built emotional defenses years ago for survival. Because real love does not only invite connection, it also threatens old identities. It shakes familiar coping mechanisms. It breaks patterns that once felt safe. It asks a person to release the guarded version of themselves that protected them from disappointment, rejection, and pain in the past. That is exactly why the energy surrounding this connection feels heavier and more emotionally charged now than before. Even through the silence, the intensity has not disappeared. In many ways, it has grown stronger, because they are no longer only running from what they feel. Now they are beginning to sit with it, to examine it, to question it honestly. They are starting to ask themselves difficult questions they avoided before. Why do thoughts of you continue returning so often? Why does your absence still affect them this deeply? Why has no one else managed to create the same emotional impact within them that you did? These questions are becoming impossible for them to dismiss casually anymore. And this moment you are sensing now is the threshold before clarity begins fully arriving inside them. The human mind can only remain divided against itself for so long before it eventually reaches a breaking point where a decision must be made. Eventually, one side becomes stronger than the other. And as that moment approaches, the emotional mask they have been wearing begins developing cracks. The distance becomes harder to maintain naturally. The truth starts leaking through in small ways. That is why what happens next matters so much emotionally, because the next stage will reveal whether fear continues controlling their choices or whether emotional truth finally becomes stronger than self-protection. If they decide to come back toward you, it will not happen because things suddenly became easy. It will happen because they finally recognize the rarity and depth of what existed between you. They will realize that some connections are too meaningful to casually abandon forever. And if they choose not to move forward, that decision will not mean you lacked value or that your love was somehow insufficient. It will simply mean they were not yet capable of the level of honesty, emotional accountability, and inner transformation that truly loving you would require from them. That distinction matters deeply, because your worth was never dependent on another person's emotional readiness. This is why your role now is not to chase them, convince them, or force clarity before they are ready to confront it themselves. Your role is to remain aligned with your own truth. Allow reality to reveal itself naturally. Allow time to expose what words alone cannot. Because what is happening inside them now carries enormous emotional weight. This is no longer a passing moment of confusion that disappears overnight. It has become a full internal conflict demanding their attention whether they want to face it or not. On one side exists the emotional pull toward you, the memories, the comfort, the longing, the feeling of emotional belonging they experienced in your presence. And on the other side stands an older voice shaped by past pain and emotional wounds. That voice tells them to remain guarded, to stay protected, to avoid risking vulnerability again. These two forces are colliding powerfully inside them right now, and the pressure from that battle is becoming harder and harder for them to suppress. No matter how busy they try to remain externally, the feelings continue surfacing underneath everything else. They may bury themselves in routines, work, responsibilities, distractions, or conversations with others. They may even behave outwardly as though none of this matters anymore. But emotions that carry this level of depth do not disappear through avoidance. The harder they suppress them, the stronger they eventually rise. Because the real conflict was never happening outside of them. It has always existed within their own inner world. And that is why their next decision carries so much emotional significance. You became a catalyst in their personal transformation, whether either of you understood it at the beginning or not. Something about this connection challenged the emotional walls they built long ago. It reached beneath the image they carefully presented to others. Beneath the control. Beneath the guarded version of themselves they created to survive earlier pain. You touched the part of them that still wanted something real. And now they are standing before a very honest choice. They can remain inside the familiar emotional identity they have always known, safe but limited. or they can step into a new version of themselves that requires courage, softness, emotional honesty, and the willingness to risk being hurt in order to experience genuine connection. That inner struggle is exhausting them more than they expected, and it reveals itself through the inconsistent behavior you have likely noticed, the push and pull, the closeness followed by sudden distance, the hot and cold energy, the moments when they seem emotionally open, followed by periods where they disappear back into themselves again. But understand something important. This behavior is not always manipulation or intentional mind games. Often it is the external expression of an unresolved internal battle. One side of them wants intimacy. The other side fears what intimacy requires. So they move forward emotionally, then retreat again the moment vulnerability begins feeling too real. They approach when longing becomes stronger than fear, then withdraw when fear regains control. It is a cycle created by emotional conflict, not emotional indifference. And now that conflict is reaching a point where it can no longer continue endlessly without resolution. Because eventually, every person must decide whether they will continue living from fear or finally allow themselves to choose the truth their heart has been trying to reveal all along. Sometimes what you are witnessing is not a lack of love at all, but the painful conflict that happens when someone deeply desires a connection while also fearing the transformation that naturally comes with fully embracing it. The closer they move toward accepting what they feel for you, the more they are forced to confront parts of themselves they kept hidden for years, and that realization alone can shake a person deeply. As this pressure inside them continues building, many of the illusions they once relied upon are beginning to collapse. They can no longer convince themselves that you were only a temporary chapter or just another passing experience they would eventually forget. That explanation no longer feels believable to them. Your presence reached far deeper than that. What existed between you touched something lasting inside their emotional world, and now they are being pushed to acknowledge it honestly. More importantly, they are also beginning to see themselves differently. That may be the hardest part of all, because real connections do not only reveal how we feel about another person. They expose the truth about who we are beneath our defenses. They reveal where we are emotionally guarded, where we avoid vulnerability, and where fear has quietly controlled our choices without us even realizing it. And this person is now standing directly in front of those truths. Memories keep resurfacing for them, with surprising emotional intensity. Moments they once brushed aside now return carrying greater meaning than before. Conversations that seemed ordinary suddenly feel significant. Even silence between you has started speaking louder inside them than words ever did. Every absence now feels heavier. Every quiet moment reminds them of what is missing. And this process, uncomfortable as it is necessary because meaningful decisions are never born from avoidance. Real clarity only appears when the fog finally begins lifting and the heart grows too tired to remain hidden beneath fear. That is exactly what is happening inside them now. There comes a point where emotional uncertainty becomes exhausting to carry. A divided mind cannot remain split forever between longing and resistance without eventually reaching a breaking point. For too long, they tried minimizing their feelings, telling themselves the connection was not truly that serious, convincing themselves that enough time and distance would eventually weaken what they felt. But emotions rooted this deeply do not disappear quietly. They continue evolving even in silence. In many ways, they mature while apart, and eventually they grow impossible to deny. Now, those feelings are returning during late nights, during moments of stillness after busy days, during quiet pauses where distractions no longer work. Your presence remains in the background of their life, like something constant and unresolved. No matter what they focus on externally, they cannot fully remove the awareness that something emotionally important still feels absent from their world. And your decision to stop chasing, stop overextending, and step back emotionally created a major shift within them. By creating space, you force them to sit alone with their own thoughts without your energy constantly softening the distance between you. The silence became a mirror. And in that mirror, they finally had to face the full reality of what your absence actually created in their life. The missing warmth, the missing emotional safety, the missing understanding, the missing feeling of being truly seen. And once someone fully experiences the shape of that loss, they stop questioning whether the connection mattered. Instead, they begin wondering whether they waited too long to admit how much it meant. Without even trying, they now compare other experiences to what they shared with you. And the difference keeps speaking for itself. This is not about perfection or fantasy. It is about emotional depth. It is about the rare feeling of being fully alive and emotionally understood in another person's presence. That is why this situation is transforming them from the inside outward. They are slowly approaching a final decision, because remaining halfway involved and halfway distant is no longer emotionally sustainable. Eventually they must choose whether they will remain trapped inside old patterns or finally move toward the growth this connection has been asking of them from the beginning. Inside them now, fear and desire are standing face to face. On one side exists the natural emotional pull toward you, something warm, instinctive, and deeply human. On the other side lives the fear of vulnerability and what opening their heart might cost them. That fear may not even originate from you directly. It may come from old wounds, past betrayals, disappointments, or earlier experiences where trust led to pain. But for the first time, their desire for truth is beginning to sound louder than their fear. And that shift matters, because it means something inside them is moving away from pure emotional defense and toward genuine acceptance. This is why the push and pull energy has become so intense recently. One moment they feel ready to surrender to what feels real and move closer to you honestly. Then suddenly fear rises again and they retreat back into hesitation. Both sides feel equally real to them. Their longing feels genuine, their fear feels protective, so they remain caught in between. Not because they do not care, but because internally they are surviving an emotional storm they no longer fully know how to control. Still, no one can stay trapped in that state forever. Eventually, something breaks open. One side wins. Either fear keeps them emotionally distant, or truth becomes stronger than self-protection. And this process reaches far beyond simply deciding on a relationship. It touches their identity. It forces them to decide who they truly want to become moving forward. Up until now, they have remained stuck replaying the same thoughts, analyzing every memory, searching for certainty through logic. But feelings carrying this much emotional weight eventually demand an answer. The longing, the confusion, the constant reflection. All of it has been leading toward a final point of decision. As that moment approaches, they may even appear more distant externally. But distance in situations like this does not always signal the end. Sometimes it is the final stage before truth becomes impossible to postpone any longer. They are beginning to realize that staying emotionally suspended between two worlds is draining them completely. Remaining neither fully present nor fully gone has stolen their peace. It keeps them trapped in emotional loops with no resolution. Now, They are being pushed toward accountability, toward honesty, toward asking themselves whether they are brave enough to risk the safety of their familiar emotional world for a connection capable of changing them deeply. And that realization carries a sense of finality. The phase of uncertainty is ending. The phase of truth is beginning. Deep down, they already know this connection was never just another passing attraction. It became a milestone in their emotional journey. The hesitation that once felt protective now feels restrictive, almost like a prison built from fear. They are starting to understand that avoidance never truly protected them. It only kept them emotionally frozen, and too much emotional stillness creates pain of its own. Now the walls they depended on are beginning to crack under the pressure of everything they tried not to feel. They can no longer ignore the difference between what they feel internally and how they have behaved outwardly.